Ignite your passion for the eternal Word while searching for ancient tested answers to today's questions. Delve into the mysteries of the Bible to discover ancient Jewish wisdom with Rabbi Daniel Lapin. Now, here is today's program.
Hi, I'm Susan Lapin, and delighted to be here with you and with my husband, Rabbi Daniel Lapin, for Ancient Jewish Wisdom. I wanted to share a story with you and with our audience. I had a young girl, maybe 18 or so, come and tell me this story. She went for a job interview. It was going to be a summer interview, and she was about 18, and of course she dressed. She wanted to look responsible, and she wanted to look mature, and she dressed in her own mind, her own eyes. She was grown up and going for a job. You know, it was the first real job. She wasn't going to be a counselor in a camp or a nanny. This was going to be an office position. And she came in and she had the interview. And the person who was interviewing her, who was running the department she was looking for a job with, said to her at one point, and he said, "Listen, I have to tell you, we curse a lot here. If you want this job, you have to be comfortable with that." And of course, she thinks of herself as grown up. In his eyes, he saw a refined young lady, and he was beginning to feel uncomfortable. And I don't think he was saying, "I want to warn you." I think he was saying, "I don't really want you here because maybe you look too much like my younger sister, or maybe you remind me of my grandmother. There's something about you that I won't be comfortable cursing if you're there." But the way he said it to her was, you make sure that you'll be okay, because we can't change because of anyone we hire, and we just curse a lot. And she was nonplussed. She was expecting questions about her skills and about her experience. She wasn't expecting somebody to say that to her. So she found herself saying, "Oh, well, no problem." And then, of course, she came home, and here's where she really proved that she is a grown-up. She said to herself, "Why in the world would I want to put myself in a situation like that?" And of course, she did not pursue that job interview further. But I thought that's an interesting thing for two reasons. Firstly, it was interesting that it gave her an insight into herself, and she had to make a decision. And it is one of those decisions you make all the time in your life. What type of person do I want to be? Do I want to go this way, or do I want to go that way? But secondly, that there was actually an old-fashioned courtesy in him even saying that to her. Because I'm sorry, but you walk in the streets, you stand in line in the supermarket, you get on a bus, you're at the bank, and I hear people cursing a blue streak. And no one turns to me and says, "Excuse me, is it all right with you if I curse?" Because the answer would be no, actually it's not. And it's not when I'm with my children, that's me.
Yeah. A part of it is, of course, that it's actually so bad that there has been a reversal in the culture where you're almost embarrassed to say anything because people are going to react by judging you as if there is something wrong with you for not liking to listen
right.
to cursing and blasphemy and obscenity and vulgarity. What sort of primitive person are you?
You reminded me, I was walking with one of our daughters who's in her early 20s, and there were some boys on it's not a stoop, I grew up in Brooklyn, I'm giving that away, you don't have stoops in the West Coast. It was on their porch, and they were cursing, and she turned and said, "Excuse me, there are children here," meaning herself, quite frankly, and me, because we are children of the Lord as well.
Was that Miriam?
And it totally nonplussed them. They're looking for the 3-year-old, and all they saw were two adults.
Yeah.
And you're right, it was like, "Excuse me? What planet are you coming from that this bothers you?"
And so if we had to put a label on what we're going to be talking about today here on TCT, what is it going to be? What do we want to help people with? In what way can we enhance the lives of our audience?
Well, I think we are living in a world where somehow profanity has just become part of the culture. It's become the way we speak. And we fall into there are two categories. I think we sometimes find ourselves falling into it, because when you hear something, a phrase or a word over and over, next thing you know, it's coming out of your mouth. And secondly, even if you don't, you still get affected by it. We all get affected by it, and it pulls us down. And so I think that's something we would like to share, is some lessons from the Lord's language and from the Lord's book, the Bible and Torah. How do you deal with the fact when there's pollution, there's some sort of pollution in the air that you're surrounded by?
Now, you've been focusing mostly on the negative impact for the listener. You were speaking about you and one of our daughters. Which one was it?
It was Miriam.
I thought it was Miriam. That sounded like her. Good. I'm pleased I know my girls. And so we're talking about how horrible it is to have to be subjected to this barrage of obscenity and vulgarity and blasphemy and just horrible things coming at you wherever you go. But I think we also ought to talk about the other side, which is that it isn't harmless for the person who speaks that way either. That there really is damage that you're doing, not just to your relationship with God. That's bad enough. But what people, I don't think, realize, and this might be the novelty of what we're bringing to you today, is the ways in which using your mouth carelessly harms you, not just in your relationship with God, but it harms you in your relationships with other people, both financial and romantic, if I can classify two important categories of human relationships, romantic and financial. It harms you in your career, it harms you in your work, it harms you in your occupation. It also harms you in your relationships with women. And why am I saying with women as opposed to with the opposite gender? Because overwhelmingly, bad language is the province of young males. Isn't that right?
Less so, but still yes.
Still true. Women are catching up, no question about it, but it still remains primarily.
Yes, it took a long time for women to realize that boasting, we can smoke also, may not have been the smartest thing. Running after men and saying, whatever you do, no matter how stupid it is, I want to do it also.
Yeah, it makes it that old,
doesn't work.
That old Virginia Slim cigarette ad, you've come a long way, baby.
Yeah, right. To the cancer wards.
Yeah, well,
right.
you don't see that anymore. But I mean, it's not that, 30 years ago, I suppose? I didn't see it.
I don't know.
Neither of us are old enough to have seen it, but at least you're not.
Speak
anyway.
for yourself, I was But and we actually have an audio CD called Perils of Profanity, You Are What You Speak. And we put this together because of a radio show you did. You were talking about profanity on the radio, and it was one of the shows that got more response than any other show you have done. People just really were passionate about the subject.
I remember somebody calling in afterwards and said, I was driving from Sacramento to San Francisco while you were talking about this. I had 3 teenage boys in the car.
Oh.
He said it resulted in a fantastic conversation. He said, I ended up the whole journey talking with the boys about what they had just heard you explain, because they had never, ever heard anybody criticize bad language on the grounds of how damaging it is for your life. It's usually well, somebody's finding it offensive. Well, that's not a good,
It should be a good reason, but it's not.
For
most 19-year-olds, it's not a good reason.
That's right. Just because somebody's finding what you're saying offensive isn't going to be a reason that they shouldn't do it. But let's tell you about how it's going to hurt your life. And all of a sudden, it becomes something quite different. And indeed, that's exactly what we're talking about. So a large part of this flows from the very earliest parts of Genesis, where the verse tells us that God breathed the breath of life into Adam. And ancient Jewish wisdom transmits the understanding that Adam was still alive. Oh, Adam was already alive.
Start over, sentence over.
All right, sorry. Adam was already created at this point. What does it mean that God breathed the breath of life into Adam? And ancient Jewish wisdom says that it was at that moment God gave Adam the capacity for speech. And this is terribly important, because all of a sudden, speech is not merely a biological function. Speech is one of the direct connections we have with God, which is why praying is so important. Being able to talk to God was surely one of the reasons that God gave us the capacity for speech.
It's also one of the reasons that, and there's a very strong, committed group of people who want to prove that people are animals. We're sophisticated animals, but we're animals. To the point that even in the National Zoo in Washington, the placards suggest that there are lots of animals here, and you've got your gorillas and your apes and people, and we're all in the same stream. And there's a huge push to say, well, animals can speak also. And they'll push until and they can find that a monkey can point to a certain word, and they're missing the point.
That's not speech.
Thinking and formulating ideas is speech.
The old circus horse. Years and years ago, there was a horse that used to be touted as being able to do arithmetic. And the guy in the circus would say, I think the horse's name was Hugo or something like that. And he said, what is 3 plus 4? And the horse would take his hoof and start banging. And at 7, he'd stop. And
everybody would say,
everyone said, oh, the horse can do arithmetic. And then it even worked if the trainer turned his back and they'd get a young boy from the audience out to ask the horse a question, you know, what is 2 plus 4? And the horse would tap out 6 times. And finally, some psychologists got into it, and everyone was very puzzled by this. You know what the answer was? It's really, horses are fairly bright in some ways, and this horse could sense when you
were getting excited.
Yeah, right.
About reaching the end.
And the horse knew when to stop just by watching your reaction. Beautiful. It doesn't mean the horse could do arithmetic at all. In the same way, let's not make the mistake of thinking that chimpanzees can speak.
Or even parrots.
Yeah, parrots can't speak, although you remember that beautiful one we saw in Cancun?
They can articulate sounds,
yes.
But that's not speech.
Yeah, so let's just get clear that part of what God created us all for with the ability to speak is precisely to enable us to connect with one another and to communicate with one another. And it's of absolutely vital importance. As a matter of fact, even within the ancient Jewish wisdom concept of marriage, there are even times where the husband and wife are not allowed to communicate by touch, but must communicate by words, so as that holy means of communication never falls by the wayside, never gets neglected or falls into disuse.
And I think when we come back, we should maybe talk a little bit about how the power of speech is a power that can unify or it can disrupt and destroy.
That's exactly right.
So
Speech, and one of the things we'll see inside the scripture itself is the indication of exactly the point Susan was just making, which is that words can harm and words can heal. Words can build relationships, words can destroy relationships. And remembering that God breathed the breath of life into Adam, God gave Adam the capacity to speak. This means using our mouths effectively. The result is not only an improved relationship with God, but a far greater effective relationship with our fellow human beings, both men and women, and also economically speaking as well. That becomes an enormously powerful tool in improving the quality of your life. One of the great kindnesses that God gave us, and we'd want to put that in front of you.
If you've enjoyed the rich wisdom of Rabbi Daniel Lapin, then we invite you to delve deeper into the Genesis journeys with Madam, I'm Adam, Decoding the Marriage Secrets of Eden. This CD volume closely examines the lives of Adam and Eve while eliminating God's biblical blueprint for marriage. This audio series includes 12 lessons and features: Embrace the Difference, Adam and the Hippo, and Burning with Passion. This handsomely packaged volume includes a Hebrew language study guide too. To order, call 866-338-5033. And for your donation of $50 or more to TCT, you too can learn timeless truths and permanent principles